in-person presentation in over 2 years. We're excited by the prospect of resuming these opportunities to discuss matters of import to the church and to the broader society. The Notre Dame Newman Center was founded here in 2017, many of you know better than I, by the University of Notre Dame at the invitation of then Archbishop Dermot Martin. Inspired by St. John Henry Newman, who built this beautiful church, the Newman Center is a place where the lively and intellectual engagement of faith and culture informs and deepens our understanding of the modern world. Beautiful liturgy, inspiring preaching, if I do say so myself, and thoughtful lectures bring light to faith, which remains a vital lens through which the human experience can be viewed with clarity. We strive to be a community of informed believers who seek the truth with confidence, speak the gospel in love, and witness to faith in our every action. It is our mission to bring a critical yet charitable eye to bear on the matters that affect our communities and the world around us. In 2011, when I was director of campus ministry at the University of Portland in Oregon, we were invited to co-sponsor an annual prayer service at the St. Mary's Cathedral on the feast of St. Josephine Bakhita, the patron saint for those who have experienced human trafficking, both economic and sexual. Each year, when we were a part of it, I witnessed our students who went to pray in solidarity with a concept: the well-being of those who have been trafficked and the end of the practice of this abuse of their humanity. Slowly, though, they would come to realize that some of the men and women sitting around them, men with tears streaming down their face and women shaking with silent sobs, were folks who knew intimately the reality of these concepts about which we prayed. Some wept for lost innocence. Some grieved the lives that could have been. Some recalled years of suffering and hardship as economic slaves, while others were still caught up in the web of being bought and sold for their sexual capacity. The concepts became a reality of flesh and blood, of folks who looked like their sister, their mother, and their brother. Out there became here, in this place, in our town. Hearts were open and lives changed, as in humble and simple ways, many of our students became active in addressing this issue through helping in various agencies around the city and tailoring their studies in nursing, education, and social work to include the needs that arise from the reality of economic and sexual trafficking in our region. Tonight, we're honored to have Noeline Blackwell, the Chief Executive Officer of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, speak to us about the reality of sex trafficking in Dublin today. A lifelong advocate for justice, Noeline will likely begin by noting that she's no expert in the area of sex trafficking per se, but I suggest that it will become abundantly clear that her decades of work with marginalized and at-risk population has well equipped her for helping us to enter into the reality of trafficking in our city and perhaps help us to consider what we might do to help those most in need. After graduating from UCD with a bachelor's degree in law, Noeline spent 20 years as a solicitor in private practice, where she focused on refugee law, immigration law, and family law. She then spent the next decade of her career as the Director General of FLAC, the Free Legal Advice Centers, dedicated to achieving equal access to justice for all. As a human rights lawyer, Ms. Blackwell sought to use the law as a tool to achieve positive social change in Ireland. Since 2016, Noeline has served in her current capacity as CEO of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. The center strives to both prevent and heal the trauma of rape and sexual abuse by offering support to those who have experienced sexual violence of any kind, educating society that we might better recognize and protect victims of rape and sexual abuse, while working to reduce the risk of such crimes in the first place. Ms. Blackwell is past trustee and member of the Board of Frontline Defenders, serving from 2004 to 2019, seeking to protect human rights defenders at risk around the world. She's a past board member of the Immigrant Council of Ireland, serving from January 2014 to January of 2018, helping this vibrant rights-based organization to advance the rights of all migrants in Ireland. From 2013 to 2016, she served as vice president and member of the International Board of FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights, advancing and protecting human rights worldwide. She's also a past board member of the Citizens Information Board and still serves as the chairperson of the Child Care Law Reporting Project, which examines and reports on judicial child care proceedings, providing fair and balanced information to the public on the operation of the child care system in the courts. And 2 years ago, she was appointed to the Independent Patient Safety Council by the Minister of Health, Simon Harris, to provide advice and guidance to the Minister for Health from a broad range of perspectives on the development of patient safety policy. I have no idea what she does in her spare time. The Irish Women's Lawyers Association made her Woman Lawyer of the Year in November 2014, the same year that she received an honorary degree as Doctor of Laws from her alma mater, UCD. Noeline Blackwell is a human rights warrior, an accomplished lawyer, and a skilled advocate for the marginalized and those most at risk in our society. She's promoted the needs of women and children and speaks boldly about what we as a nation and a society owe to every citizen. Friends, please welcome Noeline Blackwell to the Newman Center and University Church.
After that lovely introduction, Father Gary, my best thing would be to go home because I can't get any better than that. Thanks a million. In my spare time, I conduct weddings and things like that. It's a very different. It's a different approach. Okay, so when Father Gary asked me to address this topic, the first thing I did say was that I was no way an expert on the issue of sex trafficking in Ireland, partly because at Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, an awful lot of our work is focused on healing the harm done by rape and other sexual abuse and by preventing it in the first place. And the reality for a lot of people who are caught up in sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation, prostitution along the way, is that they're in no fit position to come to us for healing because they're in positions where they're very abused, very exploited, and very often can't end the cycle with the kind of help that we might be able to give to them. So we just don't have the abundance of data that we would need to really be able to work well in this. However, it's hugely important. And partly because it's in the area where abuse of power is at its most blatant and its most obvious. And then he did the right thing because he asked me a practical question. What should we do to respond? What can we do about it? And I thought, sure, that'll be easy. But actually you will find that by the end of this, I don't actually have an answer for you. And if I did, I think a whole lot of other people would have had it before me, but I think one of the things that I'd like to be able to talk about a bit with you is how we develop answers in this particular area. So what I'm going to do is go through this very hidden area of life in our city, maybe on this block tonight, maybe in all our towns around Ireland, and just see whether that helps us to come up with something that might be useful. And I'd be really interested in your feedback. So, I wonder if I had that upside down. Yeah, but there we are. Thank you very much. Oh.
We need a professional.
Yeah.
we need a young person.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Did I manage to switch it off or something?
Yes. The wee one.
Okay, great, lovely. So I'm going to start with talking about something that you don't actually hear about all that much, and you don't hear about trafficking in general. And so, again, part of the reason you don't hear it is for that very first bullet point there. It's a criminal activity. It's a very, very lucrative criminal activity. It's worldwide. It's organised crime has a big interest in trafficking in people. I believe they say, although how do you judge these things, it's the third most lucrative industry in the whole world, and certainly in the criminal world. Trafficking takes place not only just across country borders, but it can take place where somebody's moved from Ballyfermot to Ballymun. It can take place if someone's moved from Cork to Dublin. It can take place if someone has just moved a few feet. Because it is the trade in and exploitation of an individual for another person's gain. So you have labour exploitation, sexual exploitation, forced marriage, organ removals, and other criminal activities, which actually the imagination, the criminal imagination, gets better with every year that passes by. Sexual exploitation is primarily a crime which is inflicted on women and girls. Ha! I really managed to mess it up. I might let you. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that one. Okay. Okay. So, I am quoting sources where I can, just in case people want to go back on this at some stage. But this is the Department of Foreign Affairs, which recognises that we have national and international obligations to address this crime of trafficking, and it calls it a form of slavery, a crime and a human rights violation, and it's happening in Ireland. That's directly from the website. And there are 3 bits to trafficking all the time. So if you were trying to prosecute someone for trafficking, you would have to find that somebody is actually recruited or transported or harboured. And there is a means involved in it. You have to work out what the means is. Is it deception? Is it abuse? Is it fraud? Whatever is it? And that the person is exploited in a certain way. So those are the 3 elements of the crime, which, unless there are any lawyers amongst you here, you're probably not going to want to go back over that again. But you have to prove all 3 bits of it, which is part of the problem, because it is very difficult to prove sometimes. I'm not good. I'm just going to get you to do next slide. Oh, did it? Hey! So trafficking for sex trafficking then is, again, as the department itself puts it, a form of modern day slavery, but it is also a form of, you hear sometimes about gender-based violence, where people are particularly vulnerable to an action, to a crime, because of their gender. And women and girls are more vulnerable, just as a species, just by virtue of being female, they're more vulnerable to sex trafficking. Where does it take place? It takes place within the context of commercial prostitution, which is a very tricky area, because you will see a lot, and I mean, I was just reminded of it again as I was preparing for this, that prostitution is quite a contested area in modern day life. There is a movement to say that prostitution is a woman's own business, that if a woman wants to sell her body for sex, she should be perfectly entitled to do it. The problem with that particular theory is that most women in prostitution in Ireland, but worldwide, but in Ireland, are exploited. They are people who don't have full autonomy, full agency, and in those circumstances they are people in need of protection. In Ireland, it is no longer criminal to be living in prostitution, to be the person who sells the sex, but it is illegal to buy sex in Ireland, and the idea is to reduce the demand that way. Well, I say it's a form of gender-based violence, but again, that is how the European Union sees it. And there is a lot of, tell you what, we're so it is a criminal offence. There is national and international obligations on Ireland to protect people who are trafficked and to protect people from being trafficked. There's a UN general protocol across this that goes right across the world. The Council of Europe is our main treaty body. Ireland has signed up to this particular convention to stop and end trafficking, which is monitored by a group of experts, and that group of experts comes and visits Ireland every so often. Last came about 4 years ago, due to visit again at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. We have put in place legislation and we have a national plan to prevent and combat human trafficking. 2016, it is desperately out of date. Things have moved on so much, but there's a new one in preparation. So what we know about sex trafficking in Ireland is that 44 people were identified in 2021 as victims of trafficking. 25 of those were victims of sex trafficking and 19 of forced labour. You will see that sex trafficking victims were overwhelmingly women and girls, 1 male, 24 female, and of the victims of forced labour, 15 were male and 4 were female. And still, if you hear about trafficking in Ireland, if you hear about exploitation, what you tend to hear about is the forced labour. You hear of people on farms and on fishing boats, etc. But more people were identified as victims of sex trafficking. I give the previous year as well because we have figures for the previous year that 38 people were identified in this jurisdiction as victims of trafficking, whereas 128 potential victims were identified in Northern Ireland. And that, again in 2020, no child was identified as a victim of trafficking, which absolutely cannot be the case. No child was identified in this jurisdiction. 20 were identified in Northern Ireland. So there is a real sense that trafficking is a much, much bigger problem than the numbers identified are showing us. Again, where I put something like ICI in brackets, that's the Immigrant Council is my source for it there. Prostitution is a prominent environment for sex trafficking of migrant women and girls. They come at it from the migrant perspective. They are finding the people without documents, the people who are afraid of their lives where they are working, and they are finding that women and girls are being sexually exploited in brothels and in prostitution. We have our legislation, as I say, but it is terribly complicated. So many, I said there were 3 parts to any prosecution in this area, but our legislation couldn't make it more difficult for somebody to come forward. And when they do come forward, the protections they're given are so slight, the way it stands at the moment, that it is terribly discouraging. So they can be given respite for 90 days. Well, if I'm a migrant from another country with no papers and no right to be in the European Union, telling me that I'll be minded for 90 days, but that I could be booted home after that is very little use to me. But we have finally had one successful prosecution late last year, my COVID time, yeah, this 21 was last year, yeah, where 2 women were convicted of trafficking women and girls in and running brothels in the northeast, and they had significant, by our standard, jail terms applied. And then again in November of last year, right throughout Europe on the same 2 days, police everywhere did a sweep. And we have, I know one person was arrested, money was seized, and several files have gone to the Director of Public Prosecution to see whether prosecutions will follow. But again, these are very complex prosecutions, and again, you will see the narrative can be out there as well. And it is in the interest of organised crime to give the narrative that these were girls who were just going about their day's work. They're entitled. They're not committing a crime by selling sex, and the police came in and raided them and the rest of it. But the police are looking for those who are subject to pimps, who are subject to traffickers, and I'll talk a little bit about how they might identify them along the way. I can't tell you how good I'm getting at this. So then, how do we fare compared to everywhere else in say, Europe and around the world? Well, really, the truth is very, very badly. Saving your presence, Father Gary, there are very few occasions where the best document that is used right throughout Europe is the US State Department report. But in terms of trafficking in people, in terms of exploitation of all kinds of human trafficking, the US State Department annual report on this identifies right around the world where trafficking is happening and how countries are dealing with it. It doesn't look at how many people are being trafficked in a country necessarily, although that's one thing they look at. What they want to know is, what is the state in question doing to protect those who are exploited and to stop other people being exploited in trafficking? Within that, Ireland is 125th. Which means we are one of the lowest countries in the world, one of the last third in the world, one of the worst third in the world. And in Western Europe, we are way the worst. The only other country in the European Union that has any equivalence is Romania. And in that way, for 2 years, so we're not in tier one, which would be that people are doing their level best, that a country is doing its level best to deal with it. Tier two is where a country is trying, and getting somewhere. And we're about to slip off tier two. We've been on this tier two watch list, which would send us into the bins of the world for the last 2 years. And actually, it's hard to see how we'll get off that list as well, because we are seen to be doing so little about it as a country. The complexity, the tortuous way we set up our legislation, and the lack of expertise we have in dealing with this very hidden form of violence and crime contributes to all of that. I mean, there is official concern at government level, but you will see I give the Global Slavery Index there for 2018, which is the last one that's available. They also have, on the Global Slavery Index, they've done a 2019 assessment of Ireland. Oh my goodness. Like, if you were doing an exam, you would pass no bit of the exam, the way we are dealing with it. But it does show that we're seeing a tiny number, only a tiny number of those trafficked are being identified. Personally, if I was trafficked, and I used to do a bit of this as an immigration lawyer, I'm not sure I would identify myself as a trafficked person either. I might try and do something else. But unless people can identify securely as trafficked people, we will never get to the traffickers, and the level of abuse and the level of exploitation of traffickers is immense. So as I say, offences are hidden and they happen in isolated areas as well. One of the typical things about any form of abuse and exploitation is you try and isolate people, you try and keep them apart from local communities, and that seems to be one of the characteristics of trafficking in Ireland. And victims are slow to say they're trafficked, because they can have all sorts of consequences for themselves, for their migration status, for their papers, for their families at home, for what they will do for money as a result of that. And also, it's a tough thing to say. It is not something that you will be saying with a huge heap of pride. Also, when they come to Ireland, or if they come from very vulnerable communities as well, they may distrust authorities, they may not know who to talk to, and they may not want to talk to. I think it will be interesting. We are going to see trafficking coming through, and this wasn't on the cards actually when we were making this arrangement. We are going to see trafficking coming through from Russia's war on Ukraine. We are hearing already of people who are being offered accommodation or lifts or transport in return for sex. That exploitation is taking place. They may be more ready to speak about it if it is short term and the rest of it, and we need to be ready for that as well. As I say, control techniques, the very fact that often the traffickers know how to get at a person's family in another country is a difficulty. Their documents are very often confiscated. And as I put in there at the end, the convoluted identification mechanisms. I think that's my own language. I don't know that anyone else is saying that. Okay. So, as I say, we are subject to this Council of Europe convention where somebody is going to come over and ask us about this all over again. And Ireland likes to see itself as a country that observes and respects human rights and that promotes them. And in relation to this, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, which is now kind of our national reference point in relation to trafficking, has identified some trends which are going to the Council of Europe in advance of their visit. And actually their report is a good, simple one to read. So they call the crime of trafficking hidden but pervasive. And the hidden bit goes to why I'm not going to come up with solutions for you this evening on how we are going to be able to easily see this. So Ireland is both a destination country but very often a transition company as well, say between the European Union and the UK now, or into the UK. And more women, as far as all the evidence shows, than men are trafficked, and almost all migrants. And that's really important because that makes it not just a crime against women and girls, but a crime against migrants as well, and something we have to address at the level of racial equality in this country as well. Hospitality, fishing, agriculture, construction are where the men are very often caught into forced labour. And then sexual exploitation is almost exclusively migrant women. And again, even that narrative that you hear that women should be allowed to sell sex if they want to is one of the things that's used by criminal people, as well as by people of good, who mean well, no doubt. But it is certainly one of the things that is used to deny people the power to inquire into the level of sexual exploitation in Ireland. They also find that Irish citizen victims are rarely encountered, but actually because we're seeing so few child victims trafficked, we're probably missing something there. And then they recognise as well that the European Union is noting that sexual exploitation has the highest costs on people, on economies, on health, and on human costs. And then because sexual exploitation could continue unabated through COVID because of the level at which prostitution is taking place online, the exploitation continued unabated in the view of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. So here are a number of signs, but again, I have the website up there, a whole lot of things, which on their own, none of them would be conclusive that someone is being trafficked. But you would look at some things and say, people feeling that they can't leave where they're working, and people feeling that they're subjected to violence against themselves, or say somebody like perhaps a doctor seeing injuries that look like they're the result of an assault. That might just be something different. It might indeed be assault or domestic violence, but it might not be trafficking. But these are just things that we don't look out for enough as a people. Another there's lots more there as well. People are afraid to reveal their immigration status, but an awful lot of migrants are afraid to reveal their immigration status because they might be doing work that's not covered by the kind of permission they have. People who don't know their home or their work address, that has been a most useful one to find out. People are moved around, particularly women in prostitution are moved around from town to town, and that's something, or if they speak to a script. So that's Cork against human trafficking. So I know the talk is supposed to be about Dublin, but we'll allow Cork into it as well. This is a different one. Again, it's a different site, but again, there is something that has come up quite recently in Ireland. Someone with a tattoo and the same tattoo seen on various people, indicating which gang a person was owned by, if I can put it that way. Somebody who's very fearful, people who give scripted answers all the time, people who sleep with their employer or with their employee, and so there's a whole lot of things. None of them is conclusive. So it is going to be really hard to identify where someone is being trafficked. So I'm going to. So there are various actions that the report suggests need to be done: better identification of child victims, addressing the demand that fosters trafficking, housing victims in good accommodation, and getting better data. But to answer the question, this is because we're in this church. I thought that I would just note that Archbishop Farrell, this St. Patrick's Day, noted that St. Patrick was trafficked into Ireland for slavery purposes back in the day, and focused in his talk on March 17th on modern-day slavery and the need to address it. Sister Kathleen Bryant, I have not come across her myself, but I think she's an American nun over here now with the Sisters of Charity, who's done she speaks out quite a lot about, who knows trafficking in the States, and speaks out a lot about Ireland being in denial about human trafficking, that we don't want to recognise that we traffic each other. And we do, because we all have a little bit of a part to play. So this is the best I can come up with. It does not answer the question I was asked, but it doesn't matter. I'll have to, it's lucky my talk is nearly over at this stage, but what can we do? I mean, the thing to, no, there I'm supposed to be finished now. The thing is, this is a crime. If you suspect it, we must work out ways to start reporting it. If there's a house, I come from Tipperary, and one of my cousins was telling me about a house where the people were changing the whole time, and they suspected men were going in and out. And I just said, you have to report it. They said, you must be joking that I'm not going to report my child. You're not reporting them. You're reporting women who may very well be the most exploited people in this whole country. And that is happening. So report suspected criminal activity. But again, it's more awareness raising as well. There's a sense in which we fail to recognise that in prostitution, most of the women in prostitution in Ireland are migrant, and many, many of them are likely to have been trafficked. And so therefore there has to be a challenge to anyone who says prostitution is all right, I feel entitled to go to a prostitute, to go to a brothel, to put up a review on a website. The challenge is, how do you know that that person is not a victim of some of the most terrible crime in this country? Now, that's not necessarily addressed to you, but it's the kind of thing that can come up in conversation and that we need to have more conversation about in this country. I think we need to provide more exit routes. It's very hard to say to somebody, come in, say you're trafficked, and that means no money going home to your family. You may owe a debt to the trafficker. They may be pressing you for it. You may have been on drugs or something as a result of this. So there are ways in which we have to help people with alternative ways of work. Teaching people how to do other kinds of work. to give them safe housing and to give them access to welfare. So I think also to raise awareness in our own communities of how far behind Ireland is compared to others and compared to the world. You know, this is the kind of thing, there will be European elections coming up. There could be other elections coming up as well, although I don't think anyone's looking for them. But these are the kind of things to just kind of say, do you not think it's a scandal? And is this not something we need to do something about? And then it's open our eyes. There is a site that I mentioned right on the last thing called, it's the blind, don't close your eyes, don't blindfold your eyes. But I would say it's more, I would say we just know so little about this very hidden form of crime that it's a question of opening our eyes first, being a little bit alert, just kind of wondering about the girl in the nail bar, you know, and the fact that she seems to be very much supervised by somebody and can't say anything on her own, by the lad in a local farm or something. You know, so there's ways I think we all need to open our eyes, particularly if you're a nurse, for instance, or someone in the health professions. See things coming in, you need to know that these are on the way. People who are working in faith communities may very well be coming across people in the course of work that you do. Teachers, these are the kind of people who may often hear. And I just finish up there with some resources. That blue blindfold is the one that's kind of an awareness-raising campaign. Hasn't done much. I don't think it has raised much awareness yet, but it is one of those things that's on the government's agenda where we're an absolute disgrace, actually, as a people. And I don't think we, the people, can do it on our own. We need ways to build more of a consensus that we hate that form of exploitation, that it's wrong, it's so wrong, and that the people who are exploited in that way are amongst the most vulnerable in our community. And I'll leave it at that, I think, if that's all right, because, yep, that's it, that's the end, yep. And I'll put this down now that I... Yes. Yeah, and actually MECPATS is one of the, now will I be able to go backwards with the wand? MECPATS is one of the, is one of the sites I give you up there. There's a fantastic organisation in Cork dedicated to ending child exploitation, child trafficking in the main part, and they go around training hospitality people, hotels mainly, to recognise that if somebody isn't moving out of a room at any stage, you know, if the sheets aren't asked to be changed, or if there's too many sheet changes, or if there's men coming and going to a particular room or something. It's a terrific organisation. They focus very much in on the hospitality industry, and then get big hotels to get involved, you know, a hotel chain to get involved and to say it won't happen on their watch. That's what we need to do. We need to stop the places where this exploitation happens. But they're great, yeah. MECPATS, MECPATHS, second last one there, yeah, they're great, yeah.
So, do women and victims of, this kind of violence come to you guys at the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, or do you have people going out and looking for these signs? How are your resources getting shared? How are they healing it?
Yeah. So we aren't going out, and they're not coming to us in the first place. But we then have links to both Ruhama, which is working primarily with those living in prostitution, and as they come through and at a suitable time, they will say, now we'll also make you aware of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre or the other rape crisis centres around the country. And the same with the Immigrant Council of Ireland and other migrant rights organisations. They would be saying they would be coming to us saying, can you teach us about the trauma of sexual violence so that we can deal with people? And then when the time is right, they will pass over to one of the rape crisis centres around the country, yeah. But say, for instance, we might hear a bit more about it now because finally, after years of trying to get it worked out, we now have interpretation coming in on our helpline as well, whereby people can speak in their own language. See, it's really hard to say, even in your own language, I'm being sexually abused, or I can't get out of a brothel. You know, like that's hard to say even in English. So we're now going to have a little bit of extra capacity there as well. But I doubt we will ever be the first people, because this is a closely guarded form of crime, where if a pimp or a trafficker loses one of their people, they lose a source of income. So they're very slow. So we need the people who are closest, and that's often Ruhama. Yeah.
Thank you again, Noeline. Could you say something about the fact that a lot of them are going to be in prostitution,
Yeah.
either in brothels, small scale or bigger scale, but people are availing of
Yeah.
of their using their services.
Yes.
And they're hidden in a different way, but they're ordinary people.
Yes.
They have something, they're part of this equation as well. And are there some answers to that question?
Yeah. And that would make such a huge difference if we could have that conversation without anyone getting defensive about it, just recognising that if the demand wasn't there, the brothel wouldn't be there either. And it's not just enough to go up to having bought the time of a woman or girl and say, are you all right with this? Of course she is going to say, I'm all right with this. But we need to have a real discussion around how people identify that actually there's a really big chance that they are feeding off the most brutal forms of exploitation. And we've not had that conversation. That we actually need the state to help us have that conversation as well.
And can I just say, often when prostitution comes up in media conversations, that question that you alluded to earlier,
Yeah.
that is it a woman's right to do
Yeah.
that often becomes the focus of
Absolutely.
in recent times.
Yeah.
All the discussions end up there.
Yeah.
It means that these other things are not examined.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's, and actually we are reviewing our legislation because we changed our legislation about 3 years ago to decriminalise the person selling the sex and to criminalise the purchaser. That was one of the two most vicious debates ever had. And part of it was out of principle, I get that, but part of it as well was that this is reducing demand. If somebody is likely to be prosecuted for availing of prostitution services with their name printed in the paper and all the rest of it, and that means those who profit from this lose their income or reduce their income. That legislation is about to be reviewed right now again. I think the state is clear that it is going to continue that model going forward. But I know, and I know all the spokespeople for that. There is a real chance that there is a small group of independent people who are perfectly at liberty and who choose to sell sex. That may well be the case. I also know for an absolute fact that there are a huge number of exploited migrant women and girls who are not part of the debate at all. And we don't hear from them, and we don't challenge that entitlement that some people have, that they are entitled for their amusement to go to prostitutes.
Can I just say a third thing? Because I remember years ago, and now this Greta Bishop is talking about, he said something really powerful, which I always carried with me, was he said, how do you love your neighbour? And one of the things he said is that in your ordinary encounter, say in a shop or with people you meet, and
Yeah.
I think sometimes those hidden things can become a little bit less hidden if people are not afraid of asking
Yeah.
gentle questions of
Yeah.
people who may seem to be a little bit on the edge.
Yeah.
For example, if
Yes.
that you didn't necessarily think you were going to hear in
Yeah.
an encounter. Similarly, if people are vulnerable and you just ask them about how are you doing today,
Yeah.
sometimes you hear the vulnerability.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes ways of uncovering things might encourage those kinds of things
Yeah.
as well as a full frontal assault.
Yeah. That's right, and that's right. And in this case, where really, if you're trafficked, you can't come out and say, "Here's my story." You can't. I mean, they kill you, or they'd certainly do you harm, or somebody you know harm. So without the stories, it's even just in my general work, since Me Too, for instance, and where people came out and said, "Yes, that happened to me as well." It's people's stories that tell the bigger story all the time. It's why you have so many parables and everything, you know, even in church literature, because it's a story that tells it. And we're not hearing these stories, we're not hearing these accounts unless you have that absolute sensitivity that you're talking about. And we surely can do more on that as well. Yeah. Now, I think there has to be hard challenges sometimes, though. If you look at the way that people put reviews of restaurants up, but also reviews of their experiences with prostitutes up, and they treat them like pieces of like a dinner. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
A most hideous form of exploitation that I've come across is exploitation of young girls. By that I mean from age as low as 10 upwards.
Yeah.
And the form it takes is they are dropped off in the mornings after about 10 o'clock and dropped at strategic shopping centres
Yes.
to beg.
Yes.
Okay? They're collected then in the evening in the same vans around 4 o'clock. Yeah? Now, the issue which arises here is technically these children are begging,
Yes.
and there is a constitutional protection
Mm-hmm.
for begging. You can't be prosecuted for
Mm-hmm.
begging. So, this is
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
hideous.
but actually it is covered within trafficking, forced begging, and a child will not be seen as having the autonomy to make the decision for themselves. So if you could catch them, like if you could catch whoever is making them do that, it is actually criminal activity. Yes. Oh, look, that's the point, is that we are not talking people here who have, you know, a corporate set of values that we would all agree with along the way to which they live up to. This is organised crime, of lucrative organised crime. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. It's painful to see. Yeah, yeah.
And you see, over time this probably develops into more serious
Yeah.
sexual exploitation.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
thanks.
No.
Yeah, I suppose one thing that I think hasn't been mentioned so far is that, like, is I suppose the question of whether or not the widespread availability or not of society is actually kind of fueling this,
Mhm.
like this the demand for prostitution. I suppose
Yeah.
in one particular instance there have been kind of ways where online porn site has been found to be containing image like child sexual abuse material and other kind of
Yeah.
another sort of illegal material. Do you think that there is a case, I suppose, for banning or at least severely restricting pornography in order to kind of cause a demand?
Yeah, so two things. First of all, I agree with you that and actually requiring the way in which pornography is even produced is very often sexual exploitation itself along the way, and certainly, again, the kind of thing. I have a set of friends, and they said to me at one stage, not that long ago, "Look, could we just talk about rape until we get past the starters, and then can we go on and talk about something else?" Because the things you learn about in this job, but again, that is the menus that the women and girls are expected to deliver now, for instance, in brothels, is very much fueled by what men are seeing in hard pornography, and they are saying they are demanding this. And again, that feeds into the debate where people say women have autonomy. They do not, because they are obliged to do this, and they will be in trouble if they don't do it. So then the next question then is, would you ban pornography? Well, I think that's a really complicated question, because banning it, some of it is already banned. Some of the more abusive stuff is illegal. But how do you do that in the internet, which is still not controlled to any great extent, and where you cannot identify where somebody has been harmed necessarily? I mean, for instance, all child pornography is illegal in this country, it's banned, but it doesn't stop it happening. So it has to be a response that says, you have to have taboos. You have to say that won't be legal, absolutely. But at the same time, you also have to say, what does it say about what you think of another human being that you would not respect them enough to engage in consensual sexual activity? So it's a bit of both. But that's a very big question, and yeah, I don't have the answer to that either. Yeah.
I was just wondering, since the law came into effect of legalizing prostitution but illegal for paying for it, how has the estimation of the numbers of trafficking changed? Or how do you measure the demand shift, if at all, because there's so few victims that actually come out?
Yeah. So and even that, we're dying to see what the data is on that, even how many people were prosecuted, how many brothels were raided, like how many people were prosecuted. Not many people were prosecuted, and even that, it's hard to know about the trafficking that will come out of that. But for instance, that 2-day sweep that was done in November, they found, I think, 40 or 50 women suspected at risk of being trafficked. So they were going to follow that up. It'll be interesting to see how they come with that. That legislation is still very new, and prostitution has now gone indoors. It was simpler when it was out on the street. You could see, say, even in your early days, Father, you'd see them, say, on the ports. No, not yours. Not yours. When there you are. I didn't have the answer to that either. Got that wrong. But when you were seeing it, say, in port cities and things like that, it would have been more out, as it was in the Irish ports until not that long ago. Now it's all indoors. It's in Airbnbs, it's in apartments, short-term apartments, rent for a month, then you're gone. So we'll have to see. I think we'll have to see. And the guards didn't know how to investigate that kind of crime. It was totally new to them as well. So we'll have to see how it goes. I think anything that reduces the demand for trafficked women and girls, or trafficked boys and men as well, anything that reduces that demand, I would be all in favour of keeping it and seeing how we get on. It can't hurt. Yeah.
Well,
that's it. Okay.
I want to